All right, good evening. There are some brownie bite things, little cupcake things on the back counter back there, so if you'd like to grab some brownies, you're welcome to do that. Give you a little sugar rush as we get ready to do this. And they're good. Aaron approves of them. Okay. So yeah, there's some little treats back there. This is class 18 tonight, and we are going to finish the book of Genesis. Now, with that being said, we're going to read chapters 46 through 49. We're not going to read 50 tonight, but I'll give you a recap when we get there. So I don't know why the lesson plan decided to stop one chapter shy of reading the whole book, but they did. But we'll talk about it anyway. So tonight we're going to be talking about when Joseph actually has his father and brothers come back to Egypt to stay. So this is after he has met them, after he has really forgiven them, and now they're going to come and settle in the land of Egypt. So that's the story we're going to be doing. There's sections where there's a lot of names, and so I will slam my way through them the best way that I can. And of course, whatever I say, that's the name. That's the correct interpretation of it, at least as far as we all know. Because sometimes, wow, I have no idea what they are. But so we'll be doing a section of a lot of names and stuff. We'll be looking at some of the blessings that Jacob gave to his sons once they settled in that land. But so we're going to pick up in Genesis 46. And last week we read through 45, and at the end of 45, Joseph had reconciled with his brothers and sent them back to get their father. And Pharaoh sent carts for Jacob to ride on and for the women and children to ride on. And he sent that all back and said, please bring your family down here. So that's where we're picking up the story. So in 46 it says, so Israel set out with all that was his. And when he reached Beersheba, he offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Beersheba is also where Abraham was. He dug a well there. He established himself there for a while. So he's kind of tracing his roots back as he goes back. So he gets to Beersheba, which is way south in Israel today. He got there and he offered a sacrifice. And it's interesting again that he's offering sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. But we know that Jacob has a relationship with God and has worshiped God himself and knows that he is his God. And it said, and God spoke to Israel in a vision that night and said, Jacob, Jacob. Here I am, he replied. I am God, the God of your father, he said. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. So what's going to happen is part of God's plan. Now, we have the benefit of foresight. We can read ahead and jump ahead. But what happens is they all go to Egypt, they live there, but they're put into bondage. They're put into slavery. And that's what's going to bring us to Exodus, is the fact that they were there in Egypt and spent hundreds of years down there. But the purpose of them being there, even though they were put into bondage, the purpose was so that God could make them into a great nation. They had to become a nation before they could go back and take the land that God had promised them to have. And so to fulfill the promise that he gave to Abraham, Isaac, and then to Jacob, he said, I'm going to make you a nation first. And then when I bring you out of Egypt, you're going to be ready to occupy this place. You're going to be ready for it. He said, I will go down to Egypt with you, and I will surely bring you back again. And Joseph's own hand will close your eyes. So he's giving him the reassurance, take off and go to Egypt. You're going to see Joseph again. You know, don't worry about the trip down there. It's not going to be too hard for you. I am traveling with you. And when you get there, you're going to see Joseph, and Joseph is going to be there when you die. Doesn't mean as soon as you get there, you're going to die. But Joseph will be at your side when you do. It says, then Jacob left Beersheba, and Israel's sons took their father Jacob and their children and their wives and the carts that Pharaoh had sent to transport him. So Jacob and all his offspring went to Egypt, taking with them their livestock and the possessions that they had acquired in Canaan. Jacob brought with him to Egypt his sons and grandsons and his daughters and granddaughters, all his offspring. Here's where we get into the names. These are the names of the sons of Israel, Jacob and his descendants, who went to Egypt. Reuben, the firstborn of Jacob. The sons of Reuben, Hanok, Pallu, Hezron, and Karmi. That's the correct pronunciation of them. Could be Karmi, I guess. I don't know. The sons of Simeon, Jemuel, Jamin, Ohad, Jakin, and Zohar. And Shaul, the son of a Canaanite woman. The sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The sons of Judah, Onan, Shelah, Perez, and Zerah. But and Onan had died in the land of Canaan. The sons of Perez, Hezron, and Hamuel. The sons of Issachar, Tola, Puah, Jashub, I guess, and Shimron. The sons of Zebulun, Sered, Elon, and Jahleel. These were the sons Leah bore to Jacob in Paddan Aram, besides his daughter Dinah. So as we go through this list, not only are you going to get a list of his sons and their sons, but you're going to find out which mother bore those sons. So you get a nice little section. And you get if you're keeping score, you'll be able to know who actually won the war of children. It says, the sons and daughters of his were 33 in all. Okay, so that's from Leah. The sons of Gad, Zephon, Haggai, Shunai, Esbon, Eri, Arodai, and Arieli. The sons of Asher, Imnah, Ishva, Ishvi, and Beriah. Their sister was Sarah. The sons of Beriah, Heber, and Malchiel. These were the children born to Jacob by Zilpah, who Laban had given to his daughter Leah, 16 in all. The sons of Jacob's wife Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. In Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim were born to Joseph by Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. The sons of Benjamin, Bela, Becher, Ashbel, Gera, Naaman, Ehi, Rosh, Mopim, Huppim, and Ard. These were the sons of Rachel who were born to Jacob, 14 in all. The sons of Dan, Hushim. The sons of Naphtali, Jahziel, Guni, Jezer, and Shillem. These were the sons born to Jacob by Bilhah, whom Laban had given to his daughter Rachel, 7 in all. All those who went to Egypt with Jacob, those who were his direct descendants, not counting his sons' wives, numbered 66 persons. So he didn't count the women folk. These are just his sons and their sons. They do mention a couple of sisters, but they had 66 persons that went down besides all their wives. With the 2 sons who had been born to Joseph in Egypt, the members of Jacob's family which went to Egypt were 70 in all. So pretty good little clan, coming from one man and I guess 4 wives technically. So they have 70 people that went down to Egypt. And this is what God used to start this nation, the nation of Israel. And as you go through the Old Testament, we're going to see that there is not people who refer to themselves as the tribe of Joseph. And we'll get to that in chapter 49. There's not a tribe of Joseph that the Israelites reflect back to. Instead, they have the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh. And so those are Joseph's sons that were born to him while he was in Egypt. And they get the blessing, and so we have Ephraim and Manasseh as part of the 12 tribes of Israel. And I'm trying to bring this up because as we move forward, we're going to see people referring to such and such of this tribe. And we get it all the way through Scripture, even to the point of Christ, who was a descendant of Judah. And so people recognize themselves in Israel as the descendants of the sons of Jacob, but they kind of don't, because you have the extra sons with Ephraim and Manasseh, and then Levite didn't inherit land, he inherited cities, and so it gets really confusing in there. But that's where we get the tribes that we see in the nation of Israel. Even to this day, people will refer back to a lot of the tribes. And so this is the foundation of it. These 70 people, everyone that can trace their name back to one of those tribes is a descendant of these sons that went into Egypt at this time. It says, now Jacob sent Judah ahead of him to Joseph to get directions to Goshen. When they arrived in the region of Goshen, Joseph had his chariot made ready and went to Goshen to meet his father Israel. As soon as Joseph appeared before him, he threw his arms around his father and wept for a long time. Israel said to Joseph, now I am ready to die, since I have seen for myself that you are still alive. Joseph says, my life is complete. There is nothing more that I need to see now that I've laid eyes on you. That's all I've been wanting since, he was, 17 and was disappeared. That's all that Jacob has really desired. And he says, now that I've seen you, I'm good. My life's complete. It says, then Joseph said to his brothers and to his father's household, I will go up and speak to Pharaoh and will say to him, my brothers and my father's household who are living in the land of Canaan have come to me. The men are shepherds, they tend livestock, and they have brought along their flocks and herds and everything that they own. When Pharaoh calls you in and asks, what is your occupation? You should answer, your servants have tended livestock from our boyhood on, just as our fathers did. Then you will be allowed to settle in the region of Goshen. For all shepherds are detestable to the Egyptians. Now here's kind of this irony. Egyptians hated shepherds. They thought that was the lowest form of any kind of a job you could have, is to be out there spending time with those animals. Why? Because shepherds stunk. They smelled like sheep and goats. And they were just not that clean in a sense compared to a lot of the other occupations of Egypt. So here you have these people that were spending their time out there. They were nomadic. They were traveling around to make sure that the herds had their, the grass that they could eat and stuff, and taking them from watering hole to watering hole, whatever. And so the shepherds were seen as a very, very low grade of person in the eyes of the Egyptian. Now, they liked the products that come from the sheep, so you've got to have those things. They like the things you get from the goats, so you've got to have those people, but they're just not recognized as a high part of society. The irony of that is they're given the best of the land, because you can't raise sheep in the middle of the desert. And so, as I talked about before, in Egypt, the Nile actually runs from the south to the north. It drains into the Mediterranean Sea. It doesn't originate there. It's not salt water. It's fresh water, and it comes from down south in Africa, and it runs from the south to the north. And so as it comes through, when it gets to the top of Egypt, as we would see it, close to the Mediterranean, or the Mediterranean Sea there, it branches out into this large delta area, and that's where the land of Goshen is. Because it's well watered all the time, it's green. It's pastures. It's just probably the nicest area of Egypt that you can imagine, and that's where the shepherds need to be, because that's where flocks and herds can be taken care of. And so they really get the prime cut of land, but it's the lowest of the occupations. And so Joseph tells his brothers, when you go into Pharaoh, it's not a lie, it's true. You guys have been shepherds all your life. So I'll tell you what, just go in and tell him you're shepherds, and he's going to settle you up here. You don't have to go incorporate into the cities of the Egyptians. You don't have to come down and live in the towns and try to find an occupation in there. You have an occupation that is needed, and it's not really wanted. And so just tell him, hey, we're shepherds. And they'll say, good, move up north. Go ahead and stay out there. We don't want you down here anyway, but it's something that needs to be taken care of. So Joseph went and told Pharaoh, my father and brothers with their flocks and herds and everything they own have come from the land of Canaan and are now in Goshen. He chose 5 of his brothers and presented them before Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked the brothers, what is your occupation? Your servants are shepherds, they replied to Pharaoh, just as our fathers were. They also said, and just kind of fathers, they all had one father, technically, physically. But when they use that term plural here, as it's taken in the Hebrew, is it meant that fathers' generations. We have been shepherds for generations. My father, his father, have all had flocks and herds. And it's true. You know, go back to Abraham, he had flocks and herds. Him and Lot had to separate because of the size of their herds. And so this is something that has been passed down generation to generation. And so they said, all of our ancestors have been shepherds, and we're shepherds too. It's what we know. That's what we do. And it said, they also said to him, we have come to live here for a while because the famine is severe in Canaan, and your servants' flocks have no pasture. So now, please let your servants settle in Goshen. Pharaoh said to Joseph, your father and your brothers have come to you, and the land of Egypt is before you. Settle your father and your brothers in the best part of the land. Let them live in Goshen. And if you know of any among them with special ability, put them in charge of my own livestock. Hey, good trained shepherds. I could use a couple of those. So while you're up there, start watching my flocks, because Egyptians don't want to. And here we got these guys that have come down from Canaan, and that's what they do. So you know what? Pick the best among you. Take my flocks and herds in there too. So it says, then Joseph brought his father Jacob and presented him before Pharaoh. And Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Pharaoh asked him, how old are you? And Jacob said to Pharaoh, the years of my pilgrimage are 130. My years have been few and difficult, and they do not equal the years of the pilgrimage of my fathers. When you're 130 years old and you said, man, you know, my years are few. Really? You're 130. He kind of says, you know what, Pharaoh? Had a hard life. It's not the years, it's the mileage. You know, I've been put through a lot in those 130 years, but my ancestors, my father, my grandfather, they lived way longer than that. But he said, you know, I'm 130, still doing okay, but I've had kind of a hard life. Then Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers in Egypt and gave them property in the best part of the land, the district of Ramesses and Pharaoh, as Pharaoh directed. Joseph also provided his father and his brothers and all his father's household with food according to the number of their children. There was no food, however, in the whole region because the famine was severe. Both Egypt and Canaan wasted away because of the famine. Now, they're in the middle of this 7 years. They're getting, you know, past the halfway point, but there's still a lot of famine ahead of them, and this famine has gotten severe. And so people have been dependent upon what Joseph put away for those first 7 years. And that's the only thing that's getting them by. There's no really planting of their own yet at this point. They just, anything that they would put in the ground just dies. And so they are really in the worst of times, essentially, there. And so what we're going to see is the impact of that on the entire, again, kind of known world at that time. Egypt and Canaan and that whole region were dependent upon somebody having something for them to eat. And there's one place that's got plenty, and that's Egypt, and that's with Joseph. So it says, Joseph collected all the money that was to be found in Egypt and Canaan in payment for the grain that they were buying, and he brought it to Pharaoh's palace. When the money of the people of Egypt and Canaan was gone, all Egypt came to Joseph and said, give us food. Why should we die before your eyes? Our money is all gone. He said, what are we supposed to do? We haven't been making money. We have no crops. We have nothing else. You've got all our money now. Our savings gone. Can you give us food? Because we're just going to die before your eyes. Sorry. And it says, then bring your livestock, Joseph, said Joseph. I will sell you food in exchange for your livestock. He said, you still got things of value. Bring me your flocks and your herds. Bring them in. You can't take care of them anyway. There's not enough ground for them to be really fed on. So I'll tell you what, you bring them to me, I'll give you a fair market value. I'm going to take them, I'm going to send them on up to Goshen. I happen to know there's some people up there that can take care of those for Pharaoh. So I'm going to send them up that way. And it says, since the money is gone, give me your herds. So they brought their livestock to Joseph, and he gave them food in exchange for their horses, their sheep, their goats, their cattle, and donkeys. And he brought them through that year with food in exchange for all their livestock. So now Pharaoh, through Joseph, has all the money and all the livestock. Joseph's setting Pharaoh up pretty good. He's also setting up a state of communism, but we won't get into that. But he said, I've got all your money, I've got all your flocks and herds. When that year was over, they came to him the following year and said, we cannot hide from our Lord the fact that since your money is gone and since our money is gone and our livestock belongs to you, there is nothing left for our Lord except our bodies and our land. That's all we got. Why should we perish before your eyes, we and our land as well? Buy us and our land in exchange for food, and we with our land will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed so that we may live and not die, and that the land may not become desolate. So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh. The Egyptians, one and all, sold their fields because the famine was too severe for them. The land became Pharaoh's. And Joseph reduced the people to servitude from one end of Egypt to the other. However, he did not buy the land of the priests because they received a regular allotment from Pharaoh that had food enough from the allotment that Pharaoh gave them. That is why they did not sell their land. Joseph said to the people, now that I have bought you and your land today for Pharaoh, here is seed for you so that you can plant the ground. But when the crop comes in, give a fifth of it to Pharaoh. The other 4/5 you may keep as seed for the fields, as food for yourselves and your households and your children. So this is getting to the end of it now. We've had a couple more years go through. They're at the end. He said, you know what? It's about time to start planting crops. And he said, however, you've given everything to us, and we've given you food to get by. So here's what we're going to do, is we're going to go back to basically the policy that we had in the first place, and that is 1/5 of everything that you get out of the ground you're going to give back to Pharaoh, and he's going to store it up in storehouses. He says, now what you're going to do, since Pharaoh technically owns all your land and you've given yourselves over as servants to him, and he has all your flocks and he has all your herds and he has all your money, we're going to give you seed, and you're going to take it and plant it, and you're going to pay taxes. And taxes were established. 20% right across the board, give to the government. And that will supply Pharaoh with everything he needs to take care of the land and everything around. And you guys keep 4/5, and 80% is yours. You do with it what you want. And that may initially sound like quite a bit. But think about it. If you could get away with only paying 20% taxes straight across the board, not too bad. So that's what they did. And that established the kingdom of Egypt as something financially stable from that point on. Joseph was able to save the nation of Israel and the descendants of Israel through this famine, but he also established Egypt as a world power during this time. Not only did they have all the essential wealth coming out of this famine, but they had a means of replenishing that. And so they had tax coming in of everything that the people had because they owed Pharaoh for bringing them through this time of famine. So it says, you have saved our lives, they said. May we find favor in the eyes of our Lord. We will be in bondage to Pharaoh. The people were happy. Hey, we'd have been dead 6 years ago. So thank you. And they established the program. It says, so Joseph established it as a law concerning land in Egypt, still in force today, that 1/5 of the produce belongs to Pharaoh. It was only the land of the priests that did not become Pharaoh's. Now the Israelites settled in Egypt in the region of Goshen. They acquired property there and were fruitful and increased greatly in number. Jacob lived in Egypt 17 years, and the years of his life were 147. When the time drew near for Israel to die, so he called his son Joseph and said to him, "If I have found favor in your eyes, put your hand under my thigh and promise that you will show me kindness and faithfulness. Do not bury me in Egypt, but when I rest with my fathers, carry me out of Egypt and bury me where they are buried." So we're back to the putting the hand under the thigh, making the promise. We talked about that with Abraham and still don't fully understand it. But basically, Jacob does the same thing. He said, promise me. And he tells Joseph, he says, promise me that when I die, which is going to be soon, don't bury me here. Take me back to Canaan. Take me back to where Abraham and Isaac are buried. And bury me in that same cave. That's my desire. Promise me you will do that for me. And so it says, I will do as you say, he said. Swear to me, he said. Then Joseph swore to him, and Israel worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. Sometime later, Joseph was told, your father is ill. This is starting chapter 48. So he took his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, along with him. When Joseph was told, your son Joseph has come to you, Israel rallied his strength and sat up on the bed. Jacob said to Joseph, God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and there he blessed me and said to me, I am going to make you fruitful and increase your numbers. I will make you a community of peoples and will give you this land as an everlasting possession to your descendants after you. Now then, your two sons born to you in Egypt before I came to you here will be reckoned as mine. This is where we get into that. Here we go. We got two new tribes coming in, and we're going to do some shifting with all that. He said, they are now my sons. They're no longer my grandsons. They are now equal to Reuben and Simeon and Judah and all them. This is it. They are my sons. Ephraim and Manasseh will be mine, just as Reuben and Simeon are mine. Any children born to you after them will be yours. In the territory they inherit, they will be reckoned under the names of their brothers. So he said, from this point on, Joseph, you want to go out and have more kids? That's great. They don't get a tribal allotment. But your two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, they're my sons now. Rest of them, they're your sons. They're your problem, but I'll take these two. And he's, again, under the direction of God, he's setting this up for what will become these tribes. And it says, as I was returning from Paddan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan, while we were still on the way a little distance from Ephrath. Now, Ephrath, we talk about this at Christmas a lot of times because we talk about Bethlehem. And so I've mentioned in messages and whatever else that it says, you, Bethlehem, Ephrath, or whatever. That's what it's referring to. That was the ancient name for it. So he says, Rachel, when we are coming back into the land, died there at Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. So if you go to Bethlehem today, just north of the city, a little bit outside of town there, you can go to Rachel's tomb. It's a monument that's been set there. Whether it's Rachel's tomb or not, depends on who you want to listen to. But her tomb, the monument that marks the place, is there just outside of Bethlehem today. It says, so I buried her there beside the road to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. When Israel saw the sons of Joseph, he asked, who are these? They are the sons God has given me here, Joseph said to his father. Then Israel said, bring them to me so I may bless them. Now Israel's eyes were failing because of old age, and he could hardly see. So Joseph brought his sons close to him, and his father kissed them and embraced them. Israel said to Joseph, I never expected to see your face again, and now God has allowed me to see your children too." Then Joseph removed them from Israel's knees and bowed down with his face to the ground. And Joseph took both of them, Ephraim on his right towards Israel's left hand, and Manasseh on his left towards Israel's right hand, and brought them close to him. Why did he do this? Well, it's logical. Manasseh needs to be on the right-hand side because he's the older. He's the oldest one. He's going to receive the greater blessing. Ephraim's the younger brother, so he put him where he would be on Israel's left hand, so he would get a different blessing. And it said, "But Israel reached out his right hand and put it on Ephraim's head, though he was the younger. And crossing his arms, he put his left hand on Manasseh's head, even though Manasseh was the firstborn. Then he blessed Joseph and said, 'May the God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys. May they be called by my name and the names of my father Abraham and Isaac, and may they increase greatly on the earth.' When Joseph saw his father place his right hand on Ephraim's head, he was displeased. So he took hold of his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. But Joseph said to him, 'No, my father, this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head.' But his father refused and said, 'I know, my son, I know. He too will become a people, and he too will become great. Nevertheless, his younger brother will be greater than he, and his descendants will become a group of nations.'" So in the blessing, it's kind of reminiscent back to his own, blessing that he stole. But it goes back to that where he said, "I know that he's the oldest. I know that's the one that you're expecting to get the greater blessing, but that's not the way it's going to work out." And we're going to find out that as we go into Jacob's blessings for his sons, it's not the way it's always supposed to be. But Jacob had a purpose behind the blessings that he was given. He was given these blessings by God. And so he said, "I know that I've switched my hands. I'm not that old. I know where my hands are. And I did it this way on purpose. I know which one's which, and I did it this way because this is the way they are going to be blessed. And the younger is going to be greater than the older." And as it turns out, Ephraim does have a greater nation, I guess, if you want to call it, of people than what Manasseh does. So it says he blessed them that day and said, "In your name will Israel pronounce this blessing. May God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." So he put Ephraim ahead of Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "I am about to die, but God will be with you and take you back to the land of your fathers. And to you I give one more ridge of land than to your brothers, the ridge I took from the Amorites with my sword and my bow." Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather around so that I can tell you what will happen to you in days to come." So it says, "Assemble and listen, sons of Jacob, listen to your father Israel." And he's going to go through to each of the sons, and he is going to bless them, but he's going to make more of a prediction. This is what's going to happen to you and your descendants after you. And of course, with no surprise, it comes out just like he says. And we see exactly what, because again, we have the benefit of hindsight. We can look back on this and see what actually became of these tribes, and Jacob nailed it. So it says, "Reuben, who was the firstborn, you are my firstborn, my might, the first sight of my strength, or first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power. Turbulent as the waters, you will no longer excel, for you went up into your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." We didn't really cover that story, but he defiled his father's bed. So he says, "Man, you're my firstborn, you're the one who should get this great blessing. However, you were wicked, so no. Turbulent like the waters. You're driven by your emotion. You're driven by passion. You're not driven by logic and reason. Because of that, you don't get the good blessing. Then it says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. They're the next two in line. If Reuben's not going to get the big blessing, then Simeon or Levi is going to get it because they're the next in line and they're thinking, whew, got Reuben out of the way, here we go. And it says, your swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they pleased. Cursed be their anger, so fierce, and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. And so, that's true. Simeon, if you look at a map of the 12 tribes, you'll see that Simeon got land, but he's completely surrounded by Judah. Everybody else has this nice little jigsaw puzzle, and this tribe got this, and this tribe got this, and this tribe got this, and Judah gets this, and here's Simeon. And so they just kind of got stuck in the middle there. They wind up kind of getting dispersed. They're surrounded by their brothers, surrounded by their family. So they just kind of mingle out into Judah. Levi does not inherit land. He inherits cities. They become the line of the priests. And so when they go into the promised land and Joshua is dividing the land, he tells them, you do not get an allotment of land. What you get is Levitical cities inside the other tribal places because that's where the priests are going to need to be. So they set the Levites up in those different districts, but they never got a piece of the puzzle. So Levi doesn't get a piece of land. Joseph doesn't get a piece of land. Ephraim and Manasseh get those two pieces. So we're back to 12. You keep up with all that. And it says, Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion's cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son, like a lion. He crouches and he lies down like a lioness who dares to rouse him. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Ding, 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 ding. Prophecy. Jacob, all the way back in Genesis here, says, Judah, you are going to be the ruling clan. You're the one who is going to have a king that lasts forever. Now, this is way before they even had kings. This is way before they even thought about kings. But he says the scepter, that ruling staff, the judgment that comes over the rest of Israel is going to come from Judah. And that scepter will never leave from between your feet. And this can only fit one person, and that is the Messiah. And he says, Judah, you're going to have the Messiah come from your tribe. There's nobody else that fits. He says, this is going to be that blessing that you get. You will ultimately be the one that everybody looks to. And that's exactly what happens. We talked about that just a little bit ago. Jesus was from the line of Judah. The other from the line of Judah, David. Okay? Now, when we first get kings in Israel, this is kind of one of those little rabbit trails. Saul was the first king. Not even from Judah. He was from Benjamin. And he becomes the first king of Israel. But David comes in from the line of Judah, from the tribe of Judah. And he becomes the second king, the anointed king by God, and he comes into that place. And every other king from the nation of Judah, now remember this is after Israel and Judah split. David starts out as a united kingdom. Solomon has a united kingdom. And then when we get to Solomon's son Rehoboam, it divides. And you have a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. The southern kingdom goes by the name of Judah, because that's the primary tribe that it was. Every king from the point of David is a direct descendant of David. all the way down to the Babylonian captivity. And then Christ comes, the Messiah, Jesus, from the tribe of Judah. How do we know this? Because when they had a census, Joseph and Mary had to return to their ancestral tribe's home, Bethlehem. Bethlehem is in Judah. That's where David's from. So they had to return to the house of Judah to be counted in the census. And so Jesus is the one who comes from Judah's line, who has that scepter that will never be removed from between his feet, that will rule all the nations, and they will be his and turn to him. It says, he will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Then he moves on. Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. Doesn't happen. Why? Because they don't take the whole land that they were supposed to take. They were disobedient when they came into the land. Initially, Zebulun should have had that. Instead, what Zebulun has is a piece of land that sits between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea, and pretty much all the shipping routes as far as cargo that's going through goes right through their land. So, yeah, they're kind of a haven for ships, but they missed the docks because they didn't take the shoreline. It says his border will be extended towards Sidon. Doesn't get that high. Again, they don't pursue it. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backwards. Man, most of these guys ain't sounding too good, are they? But we see essentially the fulfillment of this as we see the nation of Israel and Judah as they go forward, how these tribes act and fall apart and react, and the people that come out of them, and the way they turn from God, and the way that they treat the nations around them, and it's all right here. It says, I look for your deliverance, Lord. Gad will be attacked by a band of raiders, but they will attack them at their heels. Asher's food will be rich. He will provide delicacies fit for a king. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring, whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attack him. They shoot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady. His strong arms stayed limber because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, than the bounty of the age-old hills. Let all these rest upon the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. And so it gives him all these blessings. And people have taken this, and I'm just going to touch on this real briefly. And when it talks about the skies and the bounty from the depths below and all this kind of stuff, people have said, oh, we got to go back and we've got to look in the areas of Ephraim and Manasseh because they were part of Joseph. And so therefore, the riches that are there must be waiting for us in the ground. And so they've said, we're in the Middle East, it's oil. And they have dug test holes and test holes and test holes. And there isn't any. It's not what God was talking about. So many times we look at the blessings and we want to look at it as just the physical things of this earth rather than the spiritual things that God has in mind. And so Joseph has been blessed. Ephraim and Manasseh were blessed. But it's not oil. It may be something else, but it's not that. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey. In the evening he divides the plunder. Benjamin turns out to be a tribe of archers and slingmen. Look ahead into the book of Judges. Benjamin basically takes on the rest of the 11 tribes. He gets in a little, stomping match with his brothers, and not him, but his descendants, and they come against each other, and basically Benjamin almost gets completely wiped out. But they spare a few just to keep the name around for essentially. But they were just a ravenous bunch of warriors, and they thought they could take on the 11 tribes, and it didn't work out so well for them. And it says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing appropriate to him. Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his sons, he drew his feet up and into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Now, that's where 49 ends. That's where the story ends of them essentially in Egypt for Jacob and his sons. Now, Jacob dies. If you read into 50, this is your homework, I guess, because we're really out of time. And I figured we kind of would be, so I didn't put the slides up there. You read into 50, it says that after he died, Joseph went to Pharaoh, told him his father had died, and they embalmed him and treated him as basically royalty in Egypt. He went through the entire embalming process. They took the full days of mourning as if it was Pharaoh himself who died. They mummified him, essentially. They put him in some kind of a sarcophagus, and Joseph, with officials from Pharaoh as well as his family, took him back into Canaan, up to that cave, and buried him there. They spent 7 days of mourning at the Jordan River when they got there. They went on, had a full time of mourning. The Egyptians wept for him, and he was buried there. So, people talk about the different treasures that you could find in ancient Israel, and I've always thought the one that would be really incredible is to find the sarcophagus of Jacob, because there's an Egyptian sarcophagus somewhere buried in Israel, somewhere around Hebron. They say it's in that cave inside the big building, but you should be able to identify that. So he had basically the full ritual of being buried there. Now, the interesting thing is, it will tell you in Scripture that he had the physicians come and do the preparation for it, rather than the priests of Egypt, who would have included magic and stuff in their ritual as they prepared the body. Instead, Joseph had the physicians come and do that mummification and that purification, so that way it didn't include the spiritual side of all the stuff from Egypt, but instead he was able to stay faithful to God even in the preparation of his dad. So they took him and they buried him there. Then Joseph, after they buried him, came back to Egypt, and as he's coming back with his brothers look at each other and went, it's been going so good, but now Dad's gone. What if Joseph changes his mind and he wants to turn on us now? And Joseph was hurt by this, because he's like, seriously, guys, you don't know me by now, after all we've been through and after all I've done. But he assures them that he will not turn on them. And then Joseph dies. And that's the next one recorded, is the death of Joseph. And his brothers, some of them at least, are still alive, or maybe all of them are still alive. And the promise that he has them make to him, just like Joseph said, promise me that you will not bury me in Egypt. Joseph looks at his brothers and says, promise me that when God delivers us from here, we're going to leave this place. We know the promise of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now to us, that God is going to make us a great nation, and we're going to leave here, and we're going to go back to the land that Abraham was told we would have. The land of Canaan will be ours when we are delivered. When that deliverer comes, take me with you. Joseph has no clue the time frame involved. But he just says, swear to me that you will take me back with you into the land of Canaan. And so they swear to him. That's what we'll do. Joseph dies. They have the full ceremony for him as well. He's a great official in Egypt. They put him in the sarcophagus. They take him up and they bury him in his own tomb on the condition that he would be taken into the promised land when God sent the deliverer. When we get into Exodus, which will be our next thing, we're going to start talking about Moses. And that's one of the kind of cool things of the Exodus is Joseph goes with them in the Exodus. And we'll talk about that when we get there. But, all right, questions? I guess kind of. Yeah, I mean, the priests of Egypt didn't have to pay. That's the question is the priests of Egypt didn't have they had their own land. They didn't have to pay taxes. They didn't have to pay that because they were given a stipend the whole time and didn't have to sell any of their possessions to Pharaoh or themselves. And so they were given that. And Aaron asked, is that kind of what we have now with priests and stuff in the United States, the ministers and stuff like that? The difference is that ministers have to pay taxes. we pay just like everybody else. Actually, we get to pay an extra little bit because we're self-employed. Yay! Yeah, if you switch ministers with politicians, then you don't have to pay taxes anymore. But churches don't pay taxes per se, and so that would be kind of along that same line. Now, whether that's the actual source of it, probably, but that was something that our founding fathers set up as to relieve that burden from the churches because our nation was founded on churches. They were founded upon that religious belief, and they were more of a community type of a thing, and so that's why the churches have it. But priests and ministers are not tax exempt by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, you've been there and done that too. Yep. So we get to pay it all. Self-employment tax and Social Security and all that good stuff. So, any other questions? Really, it was just kind of his old age. He was 110, I think, when he died. Yeah, I mean, relatively soon. He got to that point where he knew it was the end. It could have been some kind of a disease that got him, but again, he was 110 years old, so, at that point, a big fly can get you, I guess. I don't know. But yeah, so he lived to 110, and then he knew that he was dying. His brothers, who, 10 of them were older than him, and most of them, if not all of them, were still alive. So they lived, much further, but we don't have an account of when each of those died. But it doesn't list any traumatic thing that happened to him or anything like that. He just either developed a disease or just got old and died. All right. Yes, Mel. How did the surgery come out today? I will answer that question, and then we're going to be shutting the camera off. But if anybody's watching at home, and we mentioned to pray for him, Merlin went into surgery today to have that deep brain stimulation. His wife called us, and they had successfully inserted the leads. They had hooked them up and got the right stimulus with that. And the doctor had come out to take a little bit of a break and get something to drink. They were putting him back under anesthesia, and they were going to go back in and kind of secure all the wires and then hook up the controller. And that all went okay, and so he is doing good at this time. We still are going to keep praying for him. That's a huge answer to prayer, a huge blessing. Keep praying for him because they don't, of course, know the long-term effects of what's going to happen with this. But right now, everything looks really good. So thank you for asking on that. All right. Bye, people at home.